Good evening and welcome to the February 9th, 2022 Planning Board meeting for the town of Raymond. The Planning Board will come to order. The board does have a quorum and we will start with holding roll call. Ed, would you go first?
Ed Kranich.
Greg
Okay.
Foster.
Kevin Woodbury.
Mike D'Arcangelo.
And Mark Childs. I think you got stepped on, Mark.
That's fine. Mark Childs.
This is a public proceeding, and unless the board specifically votes to go into executive session, you have the right to hear everything that is being said and to look at all the exhibits that are presented. Please notify the chair if you are unable to see or hear. The board works from a public agenda and will be considering tonight's items in the following order. We have the approval of the minutes of the January 12th, 2022 Planning Board meeting. We have a proposed ordinance amendment review, a public hearing for the applicant of Raymond Hills LLC, planner communications followed by adjournments. In each instance, the burden is upon the applicant to demonstrate compliance with the provisions of the applicable ordinances or state law. All persons speaking, including representatives of the applicant and members of the public, are asked to stand. Actually, is not applicable, but to state their name and address and affiliation with the project. After the board votes on the merits of each applicant, we will prepare a written notice of decision. This notice of decision may substantially affect any appeals rights, and also as a matter of courtesy, the board asks that those attending the meeting with regards to a specific application not leave until the board has completed its discussion. Appeals from adverse decisions must be filed with the Superior Court or as otherwise provided by law within 45 days of this board's decision. Also, to be certain that you preserve your individual rights to file any such appeal, you must be certain that the board records evidences of your appearance this evening. All right. So our first order of business is the minutes from the January 12th, 2022 meeting. Are there any changes, additions, deletions?
All set with me.
Is there a motion?
I make a motion.
Mike moves to approve. The second.
Second.
Kevin seconds. Any discussion? All right, remember we got to do this by a voice vote. So if we just kind of try not to step on each other, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right. And approved. Done. Motion passes. As far as the agenda goes, I think I'm just going to swap these two. We'll do the proposed ordinance amendments, and honestly, I haven't had a chance to read what you sent, Alex, but I'm guessing there's probably not a lot there that we can't just discuss briefly. Okay. So let's move to the project then, the Raymond Hills LLC, and then we'll take up the proposed ordinance changes after that, so we don't keep everybody waiting. Okay.
Good. Okay.
All right. So we'll start, Jim. You actually. Okay. So the project. We did a sketch plan review last time. The project was not on. The table. So the first thing we would need, as Jim, actually after Jim gives us his presentation, will be whether or not we find that the application is complete. So go ahead, Jim.
All right, thank you. This project is called Raymond Hills Village. It's been before the board, various stages over the last year. It is back now with 25 dwelling units, which would be in a condominium style, located off Route 85, Webb's Mill Road. The project would have access off 85 coming up a shared right-of-way with MB Properties coming into the project in the loop fashion, coming back on itself. I believe there's like 1,300 feet of road. And one of the questions we had from the sketch plan meeting, which we can confirm tonight, is we had a discussion with the town's attorney with regards to subdivision limits as far as the length of the road and the number of units that can be served without a formal loop road. Those requirements may be waived by the board, but the applicant must apply for those in writing and must follow the criteria under the subdivision provisions for waivers. I know today, I believe we did get something via email. Unfortunately, I have not had a great deal of time to review those. So that's one of the factors we'll have to take up this evening. The project will be served by public water coming off 85. They have provided a letter of capacity. It appears they have ample pressure, but it needs to be verified with the fire department, it meets their standards. Septic will be wastewater systems. There's one large engineered systems and two other non-engineered systems on the property. Stormwater would be contained in two treatment ponds. The applicant today did provide us with the approval from Maine DEP for the stormwater portion of this. And I guess the last piece would be they do have an agreement in place with MDOT for the entrance location and connection of the drainage in 85. I do have some comments and some concerns with some of the design components, but I think we'll leave that to Dustin to address. And I'll, at this point, turn it back to the board.
Okay. So based on, just for kind of amplifying a little bit of what Jim said, and for Dustin, I know that a lot of stuff has come in. We normally do not accept, we certainly don't accept things to the board that come in on the day of the event. It's just not fair to ask the board to have a chance to review all that, to look it over, to research it, and to make sure that we're treating it properly. So I would ask the board, based upon what we received in the packet, whether or not we consider that application is complete. Is there any discussion on that? We don't need that. We don't need an application complete to continue. It's just formality.
Well, I'm not sure it's complete in the sense that I'm not sure. I think today, Dustin Roman responded to Jim's February 4th memo. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did see something. Dustin did respond.
If I may, you're here this evening, first and foremost, for obviously completeness, but then preliminary. So I guess the question is, do you feel comfortable that this is complete enough for preliminary review? So you're not looking necessarily for final review, and some of these components we would typically get at final stage, not preliminary stage.
Correct.
To the applicant. So you're going to have to weigh that into your decision.
Okay.
Okay, so we proceed, which we have certainly have done in the past. We proceed with the application, but we just will not deem it complete at this time. Does that sound okay with everybody?
Yep.
Sounds good.
Okay. All right, then Justin, you're up. You want to? I would suggest, Dustin, that you go through your memo. I kind of briefly read it, but I didn't have that chance to kind of digest it in regards to Jim's memo. So
yeah, and yeah, so just kind of as Jim had said, the response that we had put together and submitted today really was just trying to kind of clean up those items that Jim had put out in his memo last night, where the project has kind of advanced to the point where it's, basically right at final completeness. We wanted to give the board as much information as we could that was available, with the understanding that, if you got it this morning, you're not necessarily going to be able to, have time to go through all of that. So we just wanted to make sure the information was available so we could get as much accomplished at the meeting tonight as we can. So yeah, when we made our last application to you, so the packets that you had received, I believe, were from what we had submitted back on January 12th. At that time, we had given septic designs, stormwater report, the copy of the DOT permits that we had received, updates to the Maine Natural Areas Program and inland fisheries and wildlife updates that we had done on the additional land that was being acquired. letter of financial capacity, and a wetland inventory analysis. So that was essentially the package that we had given you on January 12th. So since then, the information that we've been working on really is around the DEP approvals and the Portland Water District approvals. So we had spent the time since then finalizing that review with those agencies. And as Jim indicated, we did receive our DEP stormwater permit earlier this week. So that item is at least a complete item at this point. We also received our ability to serve updated letter from the Portland Water District. That was in the information that was forwarded to you today, just as an update of their approval of the design of the new facility. We'd also been working with the Water District on preparing a model to predict what the fire flows are going to be at the hydrants at the top of the hill, since there was a significant elevation change from the Route 85 hydrants. So that information was provided I think a couple of weeks ago, which I know Wayne and Jim had been reviewing, and we've been discussing with Wayne about, just to make sure that those were satisfactory and that we were comfortable with that model. And the other item that we didn't really discuss previously, but since we did have 2 additional leach fields that were proposed as part of the project, we did update the hydrogeologic assessment for the nitrate plume analysis, showing that those 10 milligram per liter nitrate plumes would be contained within the property, not just for the big engineered leach field, but also for the 2 smaller leach fields that were added with the new additional unit. So that was part of the submission package today, that it contained that hydrogeologic report as well. And it did show that those nitrate plumes did stay within the property limits for the 10 milligrams per liter. So going through Jim's memo that he had provided yesterday, that was essentially all the text that was in that email that we had provided today. So I will just kind of run through those items. So I'll just kind of group them together rather than kind of go line by line, but some of the questions were around the considerations for dewatering of the site, both during construction and the handling of groundwater after the project is completed. And when you install these utility trenches down steeper roads and on the basins of hills, you do have a tendency to potentially pick up groundwater. One of the things that the Water District requires is clay dams installed along the water trenches, which we did show on the plans. And as far as the that lower section, how we've typically handled groundwater in the past is, it's difficult to determine exactly where you may have issues with groundwater until you get in there and start excavating out the road. We do have opportunity in a couple locations. One of them was the one that Jim had mentioned in his memo at Outlet Control Structure 1. We do have the ability to run a short stretch of under drain pipe across the road there in order to pick up any groundwater that may be present in that location, so that we don't soften up the ground material there. Also at CB1, which is the catch basin just uphill of the storm tech system, we have the ability there as well to put in a cross drain, under drain, if it's warranted, based on construction conditions. So we do have a solution if groundwater is encountered in those couple of areas. Construction dewatering during construction is also definitely a concern when you've got, construction potentially in the groundwater and you've got some steeper slopes on the site. So we did provide a detail in the plan set, which just showed how, any dewatering would be required to go through a filter fabric bag with silt fence surrounding it. That'll both clean up the groundwater before it's discharged to the surface, and also help so that it doesn't become concentrated flow and create erosion and things like that. There was a question about traffic, and just even though we did obtain the DOT permit, just identifying what type of traffic we'd be expecting for this sort of project. So we did respond with what the ITE manual would predict for this type of a project. which ends up being about 14 peak hour trips as a maximum. Anything below 100 trips doesn't require a TMP through the DOT. So we're significantly below that threshold that would require a permit, but it just gives a sense of magnitude of the project being at the 14 trip ends. There was another comment just about the potential for just having an understanding of the flooding that could happen if there was some malfunctions in the stormwater drainage system. Seeing that we're installing this road with some filter ponds that kind of collects the water that comes down over the hill, there was just some comments in there to consider, you know, what would happen if those ponds were to overtop the road under a significant storm event and run down the roadway and have to get collected in those catch basins before they got out into Route 85. And, you know, and how we typically look at those situations is not so much to design the system to handle those sorts of, you know, kind of bigger catastrophic type events, but to just have an understanding of kind of what's expected to happen so that we wouldn't have unintended consequences of flooding out a neighbor or pushing a bunch of water into a low spot where it couldn't escape. So in this case, where we've got a curved road down through that section, what we would anticipate is that if there were some blockages or some, you know, extreme storm event that for some reason overtopped the pond and flooded out into the road, essentially they would kind of most likely hop over the top of some of those catch basin rims. But where we do have basically a constant slope right down into Route 85, you know, as much water as could be handled in those catch basins would get picked up. And then whatever other water didn't would basically run down the gutter line along the roadway out into Route 85. So that would be really a worst case scenario. We wouldn't be flooding out roads. We wouldn't be, you know, pushing water out into the travel lanes. So we think it's a reasonable scenario the way that it's been designed. We did, there was a question about just the pump station capacity, and that's one that comes up pretty frequently on pump stations, especially those that are shared by a number of units that all go into one location, just to make sure that extended power outages are not going to be a concern for the pump station. So we did provide an explanation in our email today, just about some studies that had been done through some of these pump companies about typical water usage when you do have power outages, and and you know, basically when you've got a power outage and you know, all the utilities basically aren't being used, the appliances, you know, the dishwashers, the washing machines, those are kind of your high water demand uses. Those are basically not being used when there's no power. You also, because you're not heating the water, you're not bathing, you're not doing a lot of washing, and people just kind of, you know, when, you know, people instinctively go into kind of, you know, a mode of protection once the power's out, where you don't go and just go about your day and use water freely. So the studies have been done that show that the water usage is dramatically reduced, and based on what was produced in that study, you know, this number of units, you know, say there's 50 people utilizing this project for in the 25 units, we would anticipate, you know, maybe 3 feet or so of pump station of a 6-foot diameter structure could get filled up if you had like a 6-hour outage throughout the site. So what we do in these situations is we provide a generator hookup at the panel for the pump station. So we don't have an automatic standby generator that just flips on automatically, but what we have is a panel there so that if, you know, if you get to, you know, beyond 6, 8, 10 hours, a 2-day type of power outage, then you can hook a generator up to that pump station. It'll turn on and it'll just, you know, because it basically just needs to turn on long enough to empty that pump station reservoir, and then, you know, you shut it back off again. So that's how we would handle that situation, is to have that hookup on the pump station for that. We did have the opportunity.
Who would be responsible for that?
It would be the condominium association. So they would need to have, you know, through their ownership and maintenance, they would have to have an understanding of this large pump station. It's actually a better scenario than if it were only 1 or 2 people that were on the pump, because then, you know, if somebody was away or whatever, it could get forgotten. But with that number of people all going into a pump station, it would be something that collectively, you know, they would have to manage.
So how do we ensure that gets into their documentation so that it is included? Because if it doesn't, then it would affect, obviously, downhill if that thing didn't get turned on.
Yep. Yeah, we could work on, we could provide documentation showing that it's put in the condominium documents, just in there, that the sewer is private and that it involves a private pump station, and that it will require, you know, auxiliary power in the event that, you know, that power is taken out for an extended period of time. So we can add that into the utility section of the condo docs.
And also, where's the generator? Who is supplying the generator, and where's the generator being stored?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that would be an association decision that have to decide, you know, where that's going to take place, whether it's something that gets assigned to an owner or however they do it. But we can, you know, we don't necessarily have a common building or anything like that on the site currently. But yeah, we can, somebody will have to take charge of that. And it's obviously in their own best interest to do it. I mean, nobody wants to deal with, you know, sewer issues and a power outage, so.
Dustin, in that situation, would the condominium association have a property manager or some kind of maintenance manager?
Yeah, I mean, so the maintenance of all the grounds and everything like that would be common anyway. You know, snow removal is going to be a contractor. So yeah, perhaps it could be worked into that, some sort of an agreement there where they also provide, you know, the kind of an on-call service if needed. We could do it that way. One of the other items that was brought up is the dumpster location. It was a little tricky to locate a spot on the site that was kind of a little bit out of the way, was also convenient for, you know, proximity to the roadway, and had, you know, kind of the good operating grade. So as Jim had noted in his memo, that dumpster location was kind of on a steep slope. Some of the other areas that we looked around the site had kind of different issues to deal with. So what we've done with other projects, and I think would be a great solution here, is to actually have the trash collection be individual toters for each of the units, as opposed to having one central dumpster location. So you'd still have one contract for the entire condominium development. It's just everybody would have their own toters that they would keep in the garage, and everyone would just basically wheel them out to the curb as curbside pickup, just like you know would if it was curbside through the town, except that it would just be a private hauler that would come in and dump all those units out. So that way we would just eliminate the dumpster altogether and all the nuisances that come with that, and then everybody would be responsible. And where we do have garages in all of these units, there's a space to store those toters inside. So we're going to just eliminate the dumpster from the plans and just have it be that it's privately hauled, but use the toters instead. We did have an opportunity to meet with the neighbor, Krista Kish, who is adjacent to the driveway coming up on the south side, and her attorney, Bill Kennedy. We had scheduled a meeting for a couple of weeks ago. We had to reschedule that meeting, and we were able to meet on site yesterday just to kind of talk about some of her remaining concerns that she's been raising through some of the letters along the way. There's, I believe you all received a letter again today, which kind of summarized our meeting from yesterday. The items that we were prepared to address in talking with Ms. Kish were related to a driveway connection that she wanted to have on the rear part of her property. She indicated that she, you know, has intentions of developing that rear lot with maybe a single family home at some point in the future. So there was a couple of things they wanted us to make sure we considered. One, that we build her a short driveway curb cut entrance into her property where the elevations are changing on the road and coming up. It would make it difficult to access that rear portion of her property and in the finished condition. So we did prepare a drawing and stake out a location for a driveway. We did make an adjustment in the field of about 15 feet to slide it closer to 85. But she was in agreement to the location of where that driveway was going to go, and the applicant has agreed to build out a short driveway stub into the property and bring it down to existing grade and essentially slope in the side slopes of the driveway and the road in that area. So what that would do is it would remove that section of kind of boulder or precast concrete retaining wall that we were proposing, as well as the guardrail through there. What it's going to basically look like when it's done is a 3-to-1 slope along that section of the roadway, grading down into the field with the driveway coming into her rear part of the lot. And we're going to just loam all that over and seed it, so it's not going to create additional impervious area, and it would provide her access if at some point in the future she wanted to develop that rear lot as a single-family home site, as she had indicated. There were a number of trees that she asked us to look at that were inside of the 50-foot right-of-way to save. And unfortunately, because we're restricted with such a narrow stretch through there at the 50 feet, there's a lot of construction that needs to fit inside that area with the paved roadway and the curbing and ditches and utility lines and all of that. It is customary in almost every circumstance that you end up having to clear that entire 50-foot right-of-way to build a road. So that's the case here too as well, especially when you have significant grade changes of more than a foot or so. In this case, we've got some areas where we're cutting 4 or 5 feet, and we've got some areas where we're filling 4 or 5 feet. And whenever you have those sort of circumstances, you really do need that full 50-foot width in order to be able to build the road so that it's safe and passable, and you've got areas for snow storage along the shoulders, and you've got room for drainage and all of that. So so we did take a look at that corridor. We looked at it on our own. We walked it with the abutter there, and unfortunately we're not going to be able to accommodate her request to save the number of trees that she was looking at saving inside the 50-foot right-of-way. We did look and make sure that we were not going to need to cut any substantial trees that we would have considered to be kind of like common trees, like right on a property line. Sometimes you see those, sometimes they're even called out as survey markers in a plan. But in this case, we didn't identify any of those trees on the surveyed line that were clearly like right on the line that needed to be discussed further. So everything was either, a couple of feet to 10 feet into the right-of-way, or they were outside of the right-of-way. So it was a clear delineation between whose trees are whose, in our opinion. So I think, from our standpoint, we've communicated to her that we're not going to be able to save those trees that are within the 50-foot right-of-way for the roadway. And we did just reaffirm that we are not proposing to cut anything outside of the right-of-way, and that, it'll be clearly marked with, silt fence and surveyor markings prior to tree clearing, just to make sure that we stay on the subject lot. One of the other significant items is we had talked before about the potential for additional development on the MB properties remaining land that was not going to be made part of the project. The applicant has decided to purchase the entire lot of MB properties. That entire lot is not going to be part of the condominium. What they're going to do is basically divide the lot so that the 3.7 acres that was always intended to be sold from MB Properties to Raymond Hills, that will still be the case. That same area that we've been talking about for the last few months is going to be the portion that's conveyed to the project. It's just the remaining land is going to be held under a separate LLC, which is the same common owner as Raymond Hills LLC. So I know before the board and we were concerned about, what unintended consequences could happen from building a road and not allowing or permitting some development to occur on that remaining land. But in this case, where the applicant is going to own the remaining land, I mean, they clearly understand what they're getting themselves into, if the board grants this waiver tonight, what those limitations are, and that any further development on that remaining land would be coming back in front of the board for discussion and looking at, second means of ingress and egress and all those things. So we hope that helps to ease the board a little bit as far as, some just worried about what somebody else's expectations might be for their land in this right of way. It'll also make it so that, this owner, even though it's under a separate LLC, they'll actually own the full length of the roadway coming in, because that area that's occupied by the right of way will be part of the land that will be held by the new LLC. But again, it's the same owner. So we do have I believe 3 waiver requests that we had put down in writing and submitted to the board. I know we've been discussing kind of the concept of those waiver requests, and we were kind of waiting for a conversation between the town's attorney and town staff, just to make sure that those waiver requests were worded appropriately. So we did get that information from Jim and Alex, that they had that conversation and that those items were something that the board could waive. So we did put those in writing and put those back in front of you here today. And those items, I believe number 1 was Article 10, Section 3B5, which deals with the subdivision road length having a maximum of 1,000 feet. It also talks in that same section about the 24 maximum units. So it's kind of worded together in that same article. So we would be looking for a waiver from that section. The second one, I believe, is Article 10, Section 3B6, which talks about the requirement for 2 street connections for subdivisions with more than 25 dwelling units. That one we felt could potentially apply here, because we were agreeable to, if the board wanted to have, basically designate Mrs. Kish's rear lot as a lot that could access the roadway, that would essentially put it up to 26. So if the board wanted to write or word their waiver in a way that would permit Ms. Kish to have a home on that lot and access the roadway, then that second waiver, I think, would apply in that circumstance. The third waiver is Article 10, Section 10B, and that is utilities shall be installed underground except as otherwise approved by the board. So this one, I'm not sure if it needs to be a waiver request, because the way the standard is written, it says, unless the board approves something otherwise. So I'll leave it up to the board to decide if you feel more comfortable discussing that as a waiver request, or just discussing that, you're approving it as, a portion of overhead utilities. So the justification for those 3, as Jim had said, there's an A through G review criteria that the board is supposed to consider when looking at these waiver requests. So review criteria A just requires that it not have a negative effect on the prevailing character of the area. So in this case, I think what you're looking at is, a 1,000-foot road versus a 1,300-foot road, and then 25 units versus 24. So that, I guess, the difference between those 2 projects would be if you were to extend the road, or to permit a road that's 300 feet longer than what's the maximum, would that have a negative impact on the character of the area? So we looked at that as where the development portion of it and the portion of the road that is being extended is up in the back portion of the property, not out near the road. It's really not going to be, visible or, it's not going to be something that changes the character of this area. There's a number of long dead end roads certainly up in this area, immediately adjacent to this project. So in a lot of ways, it is in character. The overhead power as well, that short stretch of a couple hundred feet right at the entrance to the road. It's only needed to get power over Route 85 and then into the property. And we're installing a utility pole at the nearest location that makes sense once we get over the underground stormwater utility areas. And then from there, everything else on the site is going to be underground. So we felt that little short stretch of overhead was not going to change the character of the area either, where there's already an abundance of overhead lines on Route 85 where this is coming into. And then review criteria B is just, the natural environment can't be impacted through the granting of the waiver. And then, we've designed all the stormwater management techniques and erosion control BMPs, so we don't feel that this is going to be impacted. The traffic conditions can't be negatively impacted. That's review criteria C. And having this is a very low traffic generator as far as traffic is concerned. 14 dwelling units. It would only reduce it down 0.5 vehicle trips to go from 26 down to, or from 25 down to 24. And having a longer road doesn't create any additional traffic. So we felt that was not going to be impacted. Criteria E has to do with signs and lighting, and that really doesn't apply to any of these waivers. Criteria F is that it has to, not overburden the fire department or public services. So we've been working closely with Wayne throughout the project, and we'll certainly continue to accommodate any requests that he has for any improvements or things that need to be done before the project so that he can adequately serve the neighborhood. And then the last criteria is just that it doesn't violate any of the basic criteria established in the review ordinances, which the board was going to deliberate under their, when they get to the point of talking about an approval. So, so based on that, we do feel that it meets all of those criteria, all of those waiver requests, and that it could potentially be waived by the board. And to my knowledge, the town attorney felt it was waivable criteria as well. So I know it's a lot of information. I just wanted to kind of bring you up to speed as to kind of everything we've done to date. And, again, what we were trying to do here is the reason we were giving up, so much information kind of late in the process here was just, again, trying to put as much in front of you as we can so that we can have as much of an informed discussion here tonight as possible. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman, and answer any questions.
Thanks, Dustin. So before we do the public hearing portion, does the board have any questions for Dustin at this point?
Yeah, I do. Dustin, the way that you described potential runoff issues during construction, dewatering, it sounds like what would result with the water flowing down onto 85 would be close to, if not a DEP violation. I mean, I know on projects I've been on, we were not allowed to discharge any discolored water into, anywhere other than a surface where it would drain. Have you considered, or will your contractor consider, if he gets in trouble and it looks like things are going to overflow, that he would use a vac truck for dewatering? You can take a few loads out with that, and sometimes that would empty your ponds, so bail you out of trouble before it flows over, especially considering it's a Sebago Lake watershed.
Yep. Yeah, that's certainly one of the options when you get into a situation like you said, especially if you're right down near the road and there's nowhere to discharge it without it being almost directly into pavement. And that's what you do in that situation, is you would back that water out.
Okay. And one other item I was wondering about, I know the neighbor is concerned about her trees, and she wanted to see if we could save some of ours. since there are significant cuts and fills, do you anticipate any of her trees being endangered by the cuts, affecting the roots? I mean, has someone taken a look at it to see if, we don't want to be killing her trees off site by cutting too close to them?
Yep. Yeah, we've looked at that, and that's gonna be something that, in the area where we do have the substantial cut, it's really right at the project entrance. And what happens is that there's just basically a big mound over the course of about a 75-foot run of the road. Miss Kish's property is actually down at the grade where the road is going to be when it's done. So what it is, there's just this high spot right inside the roadway. And once we bring the grades down and box cut out the road, put in the utilities, the grade's going to be back down to essentially kind of where her property is now. So the substantial trees that were flagged that, were the ones that she wanted to save, they were all out into the right of way. None of the ones that I saw that were flagged were, over the property line onto her property. So there were ones that were in the right of way. So, unfortunately, they need to be cut, but what it does is it mitigates exactly what you were talking about, is trying to save a tree and cutting very close to it and just killing it in the process. So we want to avoid that as well.
Okay. And I noticed in one of Wayne's comments, there was about the fire flow model. Is that calculation done, or does it still need to be finished?
Yep, that was done, and we worked directly with the water district. So they essentially built out all the infrastructure in their model to predict what the pressures and flows would be. And then they normalized those numbers down to 20 PSI, and we were at, I think, 1,900 and change gallons per minute, normalized down to the 20 PSI. So that was what the fire department was asking for, was 1,000 gallons per minute at 20. So we're significantly above.
Okay.
Anyone else for Dustin or for Jim?
Can I ask Jim, page 2 of your memo, Jim, under technical review, section A, because I'm not an engineer, I'm struggling with, are we comfortable with the stormwater and groundwater drainage out of this project, whether or not we're comfortable with it, with being clear it's not going to impact surrounding wells or get into the Sebago Lake watershed?
Well, ultimately, the stormwater ultimately goes into the Sebago Lake watershed. The question will the quality of the runoff be acceptable to DEP? And that really does come down to some of these other details that Dustin submitted that we just haven't had time to look at yet. So I can't say definitively no or definitively yes. We need to see what the new information says, but obviously we've raised the issue and concern. So now we just need to see how they plan to address it. I think in general, most of Dustin's comments make sense. I do still have some concerns about how we deal with the groundwater issue because we don't really have a good grasp on the quantity and the exact elevation that groundwater. We do know they're going to hit it when they do the construction. So what we'll try to do is plan accordingly. And I think the dewatering plan is going to be of some sensitivity. Now, the time of year they construct may have a big impact on that. Obviously, if they do it in the summer, when the water table's down, it'll be less of an impact. If they try to do it in the spring or the fall, when that groundwater table comes up, they may be fighting uphill, literally, with the water. So that's a tough one to say. As far as the septics go, I don't know if they addressed, we just wanted to know in their design if they had looked at where the adjacent wells, I think the neighbor down on 85 may be on public water. I'm not certain. I think the only people who may not be, maybe the Smalls and the Goslins up on top. In that case, with the Goslins, the septic system is down gradient, but we still want to make sure that their septic system has ample distance away, or their well has ample distance away from any kind of septic system to meet state code. And I don't have the answer to that yet. Maybe Dustin does. But so to both your questions, I guess the bottom line is I just don't know at this time, given the new information, but that we will want to see that confirmed before we suggest final approval to the board.
Great, thanks.
Any other questions for Alex or Jim? Jim or Alex, do we know any more about this 25 unit, of where it came from, or the history, or why it is such a special number?
We don't. I think it's just been accepted as a general practice in the, whether you call it the state planner's guide. I think it's just an arbitrary number that has been used. A lot of towns have that 25 to 30 range. I can't tell you exactly why.
Does it come from state guidance, or?
If it does, it's old. Yeah. Like I said, it just seemed to be a generic practice that a lot of the towns adopted as that point where, you know, public safety, number of trips on the road. It may have been based on traffic, because some towns do base it on an average daily trip generation for the development. Other towns use, like we do, number of units or dwellings. If I could, the one thing that we need to think about while we're looking at this whole thing, which is going to throw a little monkey in the monkey wrench in the system here, is this acquisition of the other property. Because even though it's a different LLC, it's still the same ownership. To me, that probably should count as a lot in the development, even though they're not developing at this time. It's part of the development. It probably should be included in the subdivision plan because it's the same entity. I get it's a different LLC, but it's the same owner. DEP would consider that common scheme, and we probably would too, understanding that they're not planning to develop that. It's just remaining land of the owner, like we would see on some other subdivisions.
Okay.
The interesting piece of that, though, which Dustin's probably aware of, if they did want to include that, you know, into the phosphorus calculations, that would give them a larger background number to have of credits for phosphorus if they decided to use that. I'm guessing they won't, because maybe they do have aspirations down the road to develop that. They don't want to consume them at this time.
Yeah, and we do want to clearly keep the lot separate. I mean, it's important that that remaining land does not become encumbered by the condominium, because where the owner doesn't know what they want to do with that land, as soon as you make it part of the subdivision and part of the condominium, now, you know, all the unit owners have an ownership interest in that remaining land, and that's, you know, that's not the intent. It's
Right.
it may become a condo in the future, but yeah, we don't want to tie it up.
Yeah, I think
clearly
it would
it's going to be
just
sold to two entities.
Yeah, I think it would be just as simple, like I said, it's land retained by the owner under a different entity, but it's just shown on the subdivision, but you can exclude it from the condominium documents and everything else.
Yeah, because like you said, I think DEP would clearly bring it in as a common development, and that's fine. But we just don't want to have it be tied up in the condo.
No, I don't think it needs to be tied up to the condo, but it is associated with the property and part of the overall ownership's holdings.
Okay. Anybody else from the board for Alex or Dustin or Jim?
Nope.
We're all happy? Okay, then this time I'll open up the public hearing on the anyone that would like to comment on the project. I think we did get a letter from Mr. Kennedy. I really have not had time to review that, but I did see him on here, I think. Mr. Kennedy? Oh, there you are up at the top.
The little raise hand thing. I didn't know.
If I'm not sure how many of us have really had a chance to read through your letter, but if you would want to address that in your comments, that would be fine.
Thank you. And I think I'll be able to be brief. Dustin counted a good deal of it. And I think we're largely in agreement. It sounds like they're happy to work with my client on the curb cut and the proposed driveway. So we're happy with that. And his description of it was accurate, as we had discussed. the big issue, and I understand that the developer is on board, and I think Dustin accurately said it again, is that when you guys are considering a waiver, we would ask that in that consideration, you add essentially a dwelling unit for Ms. Kish's back lot. And this is something I discussed this with the town attorney as well, and he seemed that, you know, obviously it's your prerogative to go back to him, but he seemed to think that you know, bumping it from 25 with the developer up to 26 for Ms. Kish was acceptable in terms of a waiver, and that's acceptable to Ms. Kish. I mean, really what she wants is just, she has plans, and for what it's worth now, the plan is she wants to build a garage with maybe a dwelling unit on the upper level. But she wants to be able to do that in the foreseeable future, and the hope is that in approving the subdivision plan and the road that goes with it, that by taking into account this intended development now, that she wouldn't have to go back to the planning board later and seek approval to get over that road. I mean, we're just trying to say that now when you look at it, assume that it's going to be 26 units, and does that meet it? And I guess a lot of where my client stands is based on the assumption and theory that this is a proposal that's acceptable to the planning board. I mean, I know it is acceptable to the developer, but if we get in a situation, and I understand you can't really tell me in advance, but if we get into a situation where the planning board is considering taking the developer's application for a waiver and amending it a little such that, you know, for example, it's approved for the developer's 25 units, but you're not willing to take into account my clients, I'd at least request the opportunity to be heard on that and kind of set out our reasoning. I'm hoping that's a path we don't have to go down, but if it is, we'd just like the opportunity to speak on it. The last, I think, major issue I'd just like to touch on is about the trees. And for this, we're relying on Dustin's expertise, and I think we're relying on Jim's expertise. I'm not an engineer, I'm not an arborist, and neither is my client. If everything that comes together, and I'm not in construction, but if you all look at that and Mr. Seymour looks at that and says, you know, yep, I think Dustin's right, there's no way to save those trees, you know, we'd at least appreciate the extra thought going to that. I don't really have any reason to doubt Dustin. He's been honest and good to deal with. But, you know, a second set of eyes from a more neutral perspective would be appreciated. And the last kind of point I had is maybe a question to Dustin, and I think it's more just a clarification. When he talked about the construction of Honey Hill Lane not damaging or impacting any trees on Miss Kish's property, I just want to make sure I understood him right. Basically, what I understood is that they, in fact, looked at this issue and they determined that based on the work they'd be doing and the fact the grade would essentially level out to where my client's property is, that this was, you know, not likely to harm her trees. If they in fact engaged in that analysis, that's great. I'd be glad to hear it, and that would, I think, make my client happy. But just maybe a little more specificity about what was done, and if I have his kind of explanation correct, would be appreciated.
Okay. So, Jim, if the lot is going to be designated a lot as part of the subdivision, does it not have to be then on the subdivision plans for it not to, for it to avoid a trip to the planning board for the development of that lot?
So are you talking about the
This is Kish's.
lot? Yeah, we had a conversation with the town's attorney on this, Alex and I. And what he recommended was that the board consider that because they already have rights over that right away, that they would be, the board should consider them basically exempt of being tied into the 25 units that the development's proposing. They already have rights to access that, so it shouldn't count. They shouldn't be blocked from having access into their property through that right of way. What they do would obviously have to conform to town standards and town regulations. So we don't know at this time, if it will be a single family or it will be a garage or an accessory structure. We just don't know. So all we can do at this point is just say we can't prohibit them from doing what they want on their property.
And Dustin, on the road cut that you're putting in, I'm assuming you're going to be taking some trees down that are on her property. Is that true?
No, so the road cuts that we're doing,
The driveway cut.
right, yeah, the driveway cut in that first, couple hundred feet of road, that's where the substantial cut is. And in that area, what we typically do, so like kind of as Bill had asked, what sort of analysis do we do in those circumstances? It's really those trees that are within close proximity to the property line. What we do is we look at how much grade change is happening, knowing that, within a distance of that tree, if you start cutting close to a tree that's there, you're going to start compromising that root structure. So in this case, where the road grades are coming down, all that work is really happening in the middle, 25 feet of that 50-foot right of way. And then we've got curbing and side slopes to bring it back to existing grade. So in that curbing and side slope area, we'll be able to protect any root structure of trees that are kind of along that property line in closer proximity. We didn't identify any trees that were close enough to the property line where we had concerns about, grading closely to those trees. The larger trees were the ones that were actually in or within the 50-foot right of way, and those trees would get cut anyway.
Justin, quickly looking at that sketch, and I know it's just early on, it's a sketch. One thing we're gonna have to take a look at too is the drainage, because the way the road's graded, we're pushing all the drainage to that side of the road. And when we have that curb break, we don't want to send any water down into her property. We want to make sure it maintains on the gutter line. So whether you put a catch basin or somehow you design the driveway with a lip so that water can continue down, just something you're going to keep in account.
Yeah, and that's what we'll do in that circumstance is the driveway will actually pitch, like a positive grade away from the roadway for a short distance before it transitions down, and then that maintains the gutter line along the roadway. So yeah, we don't want water to be dumping out at that location. And there will be some vegetation removal. So in that sketch where it showed the grades coming in along the driveway, there will be some vegetation removal on those side slopes just to be able to replace that boulder or concrete block wall with natural looking side slopes that will be planted back as grass. So there'll be some vegetation removal in through there.
Okay. Are there any questions the board has at this point?
Yeah, I have one more, Dustin. I think the answer is yes to this question, but I think I need to ask it anyway. Throughout the planning process for this project, there's been concern about, because it's so narrow, I think especially down by 85, that you'll be able to do the development without impeding on a butter's properties in any way. So I bet the answer to my question is yes, you've been able to figure out how you're going to be able to do that.
Certainly, yeah. Everything will be contained inside that 50-foot right of way as we're coming up through. And the work that's going to be done outside of the right of way to construct that driveway to Miss Kish's rear property, we kind of looked at that as something that we're doing, as a convenience to Miss Kish, and it's not something that's necessary for our project to be done, but it's something that we're certainly, willing to be on the record saying that we're going to be doing it. We have every intention of building that out, but it's not like a typical, you know, in other circumstances, you may want to get like an easement or something because we're having to grade into somebody's property in order to create a side slope. In this case, what we're agreeable to is basically build out some infrastructure on an adjacent parcel. Kind of while we're doing our project, we're going to basically build out that infrastructure on theirs as well. So I just wanted to kind of make that distinction where on the opposite side of the road, where we were cutting up into the embankment, we were needing to get an easement for that because it was necessary for the project. And in this case, you know, where we're building the driveway, although it's going to be required because we are, you know, giving testimony that we're going to do it, it's not something that we feel that we need an easement for or anything like that. It's something that we're just doing as good neighbors, you know, for the neighbor there.
I'm assuming those hands that I'm seeing are actually someone that want to talk. Is that, Kenny, is that you up there?
That's correct. Trying to be polite in my Zoom etiquette. This, I think, was just a note of clarification and a suggestion that I discussed with the town attorney, Miss Kish's back lot, and kind of factoring that in as the dwelling unit. The way that I understood and would suggest and advocate for that be taken into account and reflected is if on the final plan, there could be something like a little box with a note in it indicating that for purposes of subdivision approval, you've taken into account, you know, Miss Kish's back lot, you know, shown by the little box by the curb cut as a 26th unit for purposes of the waiver request for road access. And the town attorney may be able to say it more concisely or better, but that was an approach we had discussed and that I just wanted to flag for you all tonight.
Yeah, I think the way we'd want to write that, Bill, I don't think the town wants to basically just grant her carte blanche approval for a single family unit till we know what the zoning and all the lot configurations are. But I think we would prohibit her rights to develop that as it was originally allowed with the right of way. So whether it's a single family or accessory structure, we'd have to do some wordsmithing, but we're on the same page.
Great, thank you.
But Jim, it would, it's not going to be, it's only going to be one lot, right? I mean, it still stays as one lot. So is it become a back lot?
The question would be, Bob, could you put an accessory dwelling unit in there? Could you put a garage in there?
Right.
I don't know what the density is. I don't know what her whole holdings is, or if she can split the lot into two residential lots. I don't know. But what we were kind of told by the town's attorneys, we shouldn't prohibit her from doing anything that she could do today, basically.
Right, okay. And somehow we do that verbiage.
Exactly. It's all about
Okay.
the verbiage.
Kathy Goslin, you have a question?
Yes, I'm on 11 Eagles View. I abut the property. I'm going to abut the property even more because he's purchased the extra triangle piece, the 3 acres. I just have a couple of questions. That 3 acres, is that going to always be open space and unbuildable due to the density? That's number one. Number two, Jim, you brought up my well. My well is hundreds of feet away from his septic. That's not a concern for us. The folks, I can tell you, the folks on Patricia Ave are going to be much closer, their wells, than where we are. Another question for Dustin. I know you haven't gotten final approval yet, but you have an anticipated timeline for cutting trees and marking the property lines. Those are my questions. We had talked to the previous owner, Mr. Buskey, about getting a right-of-way access to my back lot, thinking that we might one day build another house on it. But I would think that with this, that would not be, you know, I'm not asking for now 27 house lots, but I would like those other questions answered.
All right, we'll get you the answers. Who wants to start? Let's see. Is it going to be common land, Dustin?
Yeah, so that's area on the updated plans that we had sent in dated February 1st. Those have that area up there designated as open space. So that entire 3.7 acres triangle that's being acquired for density purposes is shown as open space on the plan. So that would not be able to be altered unless the planning board authorized it. So the condominium is going to, keep that as open space, identify it as open space on the recorded plans. As far as I'm concerned, there's no mechanism to change that unless it was something that was, brought back and approved by the planning board, which we don't intend to do.
Yeah, we'll just need to have that open space calculation on the final plan, Dustin, but well, it just says right now land to be conveyed on the plan that I have. I haven't looked at the latest plan that just came out in the day, but we'll just need to make sure that that clearly delineates that as open space. And then the question about wells, she wasn't concerned about her wells, but Dustin, with the design of the septic systems, did the site evaluator or you, the engineer, did you actually inventory any wells that could be within proximity of the system?
Yeah, I mean, that was part of the engineered system design. That larger engineered system is the one that would be close to any wells that are in that area. So, yeah, we did not require any waivers from the required well setbacks for that system.
Dustin, if the project moves along as you hope, when do you expect to start construction?
Yeah, I mean, we were honestly hopeful to start cutting trees the beginning of March and have, site contractors in there mid-March. That was our initial intent. So we're ready to begin once we can, make sure that the town is comfortable with the project. We're ready to start.
So realistically now, we're probably talking end of March, early April.
Yeah.
Okay. And did we get, Ms. Goslin, did we get them all answered? You said-
My other question was, have the property lines been marked?
Oh, right.
So the property lines have been marked out along the 50-foot right-of-way coming in. We have not flagged property lines up on the Eagle View side of the property. We're not, we will go out and mark limits of clearing with survey before that's done. We don't like to take any chances with tree cutting. So that will all be survey marked for the limits of clearing. And all that's obviously contained within the property.
But Dustin, you will be setting pins as part of the project, correct? For the newly acquired lands or any corners that weren't previously marked?
Yeah, the new property corners from that land would be marked with pins. Property corners for the condominium lot itself, any corners that do not have markings on them now will have rebar set on those corners. Some of those corners are marked already. Any that are not will have pins set.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Is there anybody else on the line or on the Zoom that wants to have a question for the public hearing? Seeing no hands. Mr. Kennedy, are you all set? You still there?
I am. Yeah, I think for tonight I am all set. Thank you.
Okay. All right, then I will close the public hearing and we'll go back to the board. Let me just call up here. Dustin, on your waiver requests, I guess we can, the 1,000 foot, I think we talked about that as a board already. I don't really, no one really saw that as an issue. The 25 dwelling units, I guess we need to talk about. The overhead cables, we have always addressed that as a waiver, but we've always addressed it as a waiver in the project itself. So I think personally, anyone can jump in here. I don't think it's necessary for a waiver if the only thing that you're requesting is to get the power to the property. I don't see that as a waiver requirement. That's just me. I don't know, anyone in the board?
No, I agree completely. I thought the same thing when he said that. I was under the assumption it was overhead utilities all the way up, but if it's just to get the power to the property, that's do that with houses all the time. So,
Yeah. Anyone else that object to that? Okay, so I guess we can kind of drop that waiver request off.
I have one question regarding the waivers.
Yes.
Where we just got this waiver request and information of what as to the criteria for the waiver. I know you guys can debate it tonight. As I mentioned in my memo, I think because we didn't get this in time for the public to absorb like we are and have a moment to review it. I don't think you want to vote on it tonight, and maybe you weren't even thinking about that, but you can clearly discuss it.
Right. I am not interested. We're not going to be voting. I just want to give Dustin, let him know, since the information is here, just to let him know where we're going, where the board feels, so we can move the project along.
Thank you.
When we get there. But thanks anyway, Jim. So I guess we really should address that 25 unit, more than 25 unit requirement for the two connections. One of the things, that Dustin, that you said, that I took down on notes, it makes more sense, is to have, that requirement based upon trips and not based upon units. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, and I think too, a lot of other towns give consideration for projects that are on public water with hydrants versus those that are not. So when it comes to like road length, number of units on a dead end road, usually those are the things you look at is, like you said, how many vehicle trips and do you have adequate, public water supply for fire suppression? Like those are usually the two things.
So I have a couple questions for that, Bob. That's a great point. Dustin, are these going to be 2-bedroom units or 1-bedroom units? What's the game plan?
These will be, so some will be 2-bedroom units and some will actually be 3-bedroom units.
Okay. Because Bob, one of the things I'm looking at is the number of, rather than the number of dwelling units, might be the number of occupants in the building, based on bedroom sizes. So if you got 20, say you got 26, just for 25 with 2 bedrooms, that's 50 bedrooms, where if, you can almost work it backwards to that point. So if he has the equivalent of the same as what we normally would see with a single family development of, say it's 24 units, 3 bedrooms, that's 72 bedrooms basically. And if this development has less than 72, that might be some kind of measurement that you could substantiate the density and the impact that the development would have on trips and number of pedestrians and vehicles.
How does anybody else feel on this topic?
I guess I'm leaning towards granting a waiver partly because of the fact that it was confusing language, and I think the developer was sort of depending on, at least initially, 24 being fine, and then finding out, and then changing to 25 and thinking 25 was fine based on the language. So I think that's kind of a bit of a trap that maybe we can help them with.
Yeah, and to your point, that we are addressing that with the changes upcoming in the ordinances. We're going to clarify that. So.
So is anybody really concerned about this 25?
I guess I would like to hear from Wayne if there was any public safety concerns with the number of units.
Wayne, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
Okay, I kind of do like you muted anyway.
So I know originally with both the length of the road and the number of dwellings served, with only one exit, that some of the thought process there was being able to evacuate people, especially in the event of a wildfire, and not forcing them all through one exit. So I think that's some of the premise for the number of units versus how many exits from that development. So I'm not saying that this development can't evacuate those people, but I think that's something that we should continue to think about as we move forward.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
That's-
it is.
I hadn't thought of that. What else? Anyone else on the,
And as far as the other waiver goes, as the board is aware, but maybe not the public, our road standards have already been changed to allow for roads greater than 1,000 feet with certain provisions for emergency turnouts or areas to pull over to bypass so that we don't congest the roadways for passage in emergency situations. So those are in our street standards. Unfortunately, they have not yet been changed in our subdivision standards. So that one to me makes all the sense because we've already adopted it in our street standards, and we'll clean it up in the subdivision as well. But it's just that one's more of a technicality, I feel.
yeah, and we have waived that requirement in the
Correct.
past on more than one occasion.
Maybe it's not something to be properly considered, but I guess in this instance, I'd like to know what possible option there would be to make this, create connectivity and make this not a dead end road. And I guess I'm not really seeing anything. I mean, to me, I don't know what the developer could do.
Well, they own the piece next door, which unfortunately doesn't bring you back to a public road. It's basically a landlocked parcel. So I don't know. I mean, in a normal case, Mike, what we would do is, the owner would have to acquire a piece of property to get to a secondary private road or public street.
Gotcha.
Okay, so I'm sensing we have no problems at all with the 1,000-foot waiver. And the 25-unit waiver sounds like it's going to be okay. Dustin, I think I would like to see you put some more specifics into that waiver, such as the trips and what Jim talked about as the bedrooms comparisons, just to give us a little more, give your waiver a little more support and us a little more to lean on if we do indeed vote that way.
Yeah, and to your point, Bob, I don't want to use the P word, but we could be setting a precedent, so we want to be very careful how we go about this.
Right, exactly. Which is why I think those two pieces of information would be very helpful in the waiver request.
What is the board, just to kind of preempt Bill's question, I guess, how does the board want to handle the Kish property? Do you want me to somehow incorporate that into the waiver request for 25, or is that something that the board's going to just handle separately as a note?
Yeah, I think based on what Alex and I heard from our town's attorney was there should be a separate note that basically exempts, I don't know if I want to use it as a legal term, but basically, she has rights before, she has rights afterwards. I understand that would be another unit on the road, but we just take her out of the equation and let her stand alone. And then yours will be for 25 above and beyond that.
All right, so basically her lot would not be subject to the subdivision ordinance, which is what requires a 25 lots and all that. Okay, I'll talk with Bill on that separately just to make sure that they're okay with that, and I'll craft a note.
Yeah, and we probably, Alex, will want to run that by, we may want to run that by Phil, just be careful too.
Okay,
And to back that up too, Dustin, we'd want to note on there too, any further development on the parcel that you're acquiring could not be done unless it comes back to the planning board.
Right.
We do have a lot of new information. A lot of things have been raised. And obviously, Bob, unfortunately, we just haven't had the time to kind of go through that. So I don't know what you want to do tonight, but we just need, I think we as a staff need more time to kind of peruse all this material.
well, yeah, I would agree. Actually, I'm just wondering now, I think we will probably just kind of to more get it wrapped up, the project, moving forward. I think what we'll just officially do is table it tonight. And then when we bring it back in March, we'll have gone through all these things, we'll have the waivers, and assuming that everything is there are no more problems, I think what we could kind of skip the preliminary approval and go right to final approval if in fact.
Or we could do them simultaneously, basically.
Yes, right.
The one thing we will have to do though is because of the waivers and everything like that, I think we do have to have a continuance of the public hearing at the next.
Well, we could do that. We've never done that in the past. We've only had one, even with waivers.
Well, yeah, well, okay.
Especially, and I think with these two waivers, Jim, they're well, actually, the 25 unit waiver is different, but the 1,000 employee waiver, we've done that before.
Right.
We've never had additional public. I mean, this is our second public hearing actually on this project. But if anyone shows up, I'm not going to advertise it as a public hearing, but if anybody shows up and wants to talk about it, we can certainly talk about it.
Okay.
All right. So, Dustin, what do you need?
Yeah, the waivers were the biggest item for me for discussion. So I guess I've definitely heard from a couple of board members here. So I guess I'll just ask, and does anybody have concerns about the 25 unit waiver that they'd like me to consider specifically? I guess I'll just, if anybody does, just let me know. Otherwise, we'll, proceed with, looking at that at the next meeting, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's kind of safe to assume that given a justification that kind of pins it down to project specifics,
yeah,
so that we're not setting a precedence, I think you'd be pretty safe in assuming that was going to pass.
All right.
I think
We'll work closely with Jim and Bill as well, just to kind of make sure that all the notes are cleaned up on the plan, so that all this information that just kind of came together here in this last week, we kind of compile all that and make sure everything's nice and clean for you at the next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, I think from my standpoint, the biggest one's going to be stormwater and groundwater. I do think that one, we got to be careful about how that interacts with 85.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
from the fire department, my apologies for the late memo from us regarding the project. But that was submitted today, and just wanted to make sure that Dustin and you folks did receive that, or if I need to send that back out to folks.
I have not received anything that you submitted today, Wayne.
Okay.
I got it in my email.
Oh, it's in the email now? Okay.
Yeah, I got it today too.
Okay.
Yeah, I got it.
Dustin, have you received that?
I did. Yep. Yeah. I think it was like 6 o'clock. So, yep.
Okay, but Wayne, while you're there, you're okay with the turnarounds for the hammerheads or the hammerheads?
Nope, that hammerhead turnaround functioned properly based on the auto turn that Dustin provided. I asked him to provide an additional one on that first right-hand turn, just to verify that the fire truck can make that turn without leaving the roadway. And then part of what's in the memo is talking about fire lanes and establishing fire lanes to make sure that we got access either to that hammerhead or to the front of these buildings. And then the final thing was talking about the water district's estimate for gallons per minute and the fire flows required. And Dustin and I talked about what the applicant thought would be the way to approach that. So that's what's in the memo.
Wayne, you bring up a great point, which was one of my other things I suggested that they take a look at is the number of visitor parking so that we don't have on-street parking within that loop area. Was I suggested they maybe put 4 more parking spaces on the opposite side from where the current 4 are to give them 8 total. So I don't know if you're going to require that the loop be no parking, but obviously when you get a winter like this, things shrink.
Oh, what we were asking for is at least on the building side, the one that fronts the side of the street that fronts the building, for no parking in those areas.
Okay. So any other questions or discussions?
Well, I guess that just brings up one quick question. Dustin, what are your thoughts on Jim's suggestion to add 4 more parking lots?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be good just to discuss that here briefly, because, so what our thinking was on that is, you know, we provided those extra parking spaces in that kind of central location where all these units are really kind of condensed around that one big cul-de-sac. There is room to put a few more spaces on the other side, basically out in front of units 18 and 19. There's some room there to put a few more spaces in that location. You know, what we're trying to do at this point, we don't think we're going to need more than those 4 spaces that we're showing. What we would hope to be able to do is where we've kind of reserved that area for additional parking. If at some point, you know, if it becomes an issue where those 4 spaces seem like they're, you know, being used more often than we think they're going to be, that we have room on the site that we could come in and just put in 4 more parking spaces. We've had projects where, you know, we've boxed ourselves into a corner and then you need another 4 parking spaces and there's just nowhere to put them. But in this case, well, maybe what we could do as a compromise is show, we could even kind of dash them in on the plans and say, you know, expanded parking area if it's needed. And, you know, the owner in the condo is definitely going to want to add those spaces. They're not going to want congestion, but would rather just not build them right off the bat if the 4 spaces end up being enough.
So if that were to occur, like after the project gets approved, you get built out, the developer no longer is involved, right, with the particular project. So then it's on the condominium association to pay for that?
Yeah, so at that point, the association, you know, if they decided, it's like, you know, we have these spaces here that we can build if we want them. If it becomes an issue where they feel like there's, you know, not enough room for their guests to come in and park, they have the option to build out those parking spaces. But for now, you know, we'd prefer to have more of the green space in that middle area, keep it as lawn, but have the ability to, you know, but we could even show maybe 6 parking spaces up there. So we have a bigger area where they could build out some of them, they could build out all of them. But it just, at this point, we're trying to, you know, we'd prefer to keep it as green space and just keep the option open for, that's where they would get built in the future. It'd be very minimally disruptive to go in and have to just gravel in a pad and pave in a few parking spaces in that area if it was needed.
Would those additional parking spaces significantly impact your stormwater calculations, or it falls within
So, yeah, because right now that whole inside of that kind of football, it all drains down to one location and goes down into the filter pond. So in that area, directly across from units 18 and 19, if we were to, you know, pave an area in there for some perpendicular parking, we would grade that so it runs into the lawn area, and then it would just run down through the driveway culverts, just like it does now. So it wouldn't alter the pattern of drainage or create a block or anything like that.
Justin, what do you have for width on the shoulders? I'm just kind of curious. Can they park on the shoulders if they don't have a parking area?
I believe there are 2-foot shoulders on the sides that don't have any curbing. On the uphill side where the unit driveways are, we are curbing that side of the road just to, keep it clean. So it's really the downhill side of the road that doesn't have the curbing. And I think we have a 2-foot shoulder along those areas.
Maybe, I mean, that's the other option is you could maybe put it on the shoulder.
Well, how about the site where the dumpster was gonna go? Could you get a parking lot or two there?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose we could put a couple of spaces there. They're not really near any of the units, but they're,
Walking is good for you.
it is, yeah.
I'm not too concerned about the distance from the house or anything.
Yeah. So to answer your question, yes, I mean, that's area that, where we're gonna be removing that dumpster pad and the little driveway that goes to it. That is area that could be used, for parking, but it is on that 9% stretch of road, going up. I mean, it's almost 10%. So it's on a little bit more aggressive of a cross slope, whereas up across from units 18, 19, it's pretty flat.
Food for thought.
Yep.
All right, anything else? Okay, then I'd suggest that I make a motion that we move to put the Raymond Hills LLC 25-unit condominium subdivision, and that we table the application for present and to revisit in the March planning board meeting.
So moved.
Second, is there any discussion?
Second.
All right, all those in favor signify by aye.
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 It passes. Okay, Dustin, so you're up for March.
Okay, and then I'll just, I want to make sure, I'll work with Jim. I know Sandy's out for a little bit, but I want to make sure we get this information to you so that it gets out in your packets and all that stuff. I think technically the submission deadline was today for that meeting in March. So again, I just need to work with Sandy and make sure all the information, because it came in a few emails and stuff, and I want to make sure that you have it, printed in writing that you can review. So I'll work with her on that.
Okay, but I understand that the deadline has passed, and we are a little flexible, but the day of or the day before receiving information is really of no use to us. If you get it to us 2 weeks to a week, 10 days ahead of time, I think, for a project that we have been looking at now for a number of months, we'll be fine.
All right, very good. I appreciate it.
Okay. All right, then we're gonna up to you, Alex, for the ordinance review.
All right. Well, I can bring the document up. I should be able to make this relatively quick because there isn't a whole lot that's changed since the last time you guys looked at this. I did send over an email earlier. I did send over this updated document that shows a few changes. On the first one, which was the ZBA change. The only thing, this one's gone up to the attorney. He made a few very small minor changes, but one of the only substantial changes was number 6 in this section, which just matches it up with the land use ordinance. It just matches the shoreland and the land use. So that's really the only change for this one. It's the same exact language, which would match up the ordinance with the state statute for appeals. The second one was solar, and I don't believe I had any changes in that one. That one has gone to the town attorney, and he has not given me an updated document on that yet. He just got them this week, so I expect I'll hear back from him probably next week on all of these, and we'll update if there's any changes.
Just- Alex, a quick question. From
Sure.
the last meeting, did you add in the fire department's input on this particular ordinance?
I did. That was added in before the last meeting.
Well, okay.
Yep, the section, it's up here. Fire department. No,
Yeah.
that wasn't it. Do you remember what section it was?
I don't, my eyes are kind of flipping on me.
Yeah,
I just wanted to make sure that we.
here we go. It's right here. So I know I can see right here, fire chief and her designee was one of your changes. So I know this document has all of the items that you had pointed out last time.
Yep, I see it. Very good. Thank you.
Yep. I would definitely check, maybe if you can sometime in the next couple of days, the PDF I sent over today, just to make sure I didn't miss anything, but I'm pretty sure it has everything that you had asked for.
Okay.
All right. Number 3, and that was the conditional use stuff. I don't believe there were any changes this time. Wayne, I did add the stuff that you had brought up last time on that one. So that one's gone off to the attorney. Number 4. Number 4 was the big one from last time. This has the most changes this week or this meeting. And I guess I'm looking for feedback from you guys on this. Added a definition for corner lot, updated the definition for lot frontage, added a definition for front setback, and I think that's it. So if you guys want to discuss this one, we can. Basically, I took the input from last time where you guys wanted the frontage to be on the lot line where the driveway comes in. I kind of struggled wording that. So if, Jim, if you want to wordsmith something on that, you can. And I did add, I removed the S from lot lines so that it's a singular line instead of multiple lines if it's on like a hammerhead or something. And then setback front is a new definition. The big change there would be for corner lots, the front setback shall apply to any lot line abutting a street or road, because it was brought up last time you guys thought it made sense to apply the front setback to any line that abuts a street or road.
Yep.
So do we have any thoughts on those?
Looks good to me.
Okay.
I think that's all that we talked about, Alex.
Yeah. So if you guys have any other thoughts after, I know you just got this today again, so if you take a peek at it and have any other thoughts, feel free to shoot an email. I just copied the same changes for shoreland for that as well. 5 is easy. That was just the change that we talked about tonight. Jim, do we need to change anything else with this though? Because I know we've talked about the subdivision road length.
Yeah, the 1,000-foot needs to be altered as well. So that
Yeah.
it's in that same 6.
Yep.
Down at the bottom, that needs to be
Yep.
altered. I would just say must comply with street standards.
Okay.
With
I need to
street
make that
ordinance.
change. I thought of that earlier today and I didn't get it changed before I sent this out. So I got to still do that.
Yeah, I would just reference our street ordinance would probably be the easiest way to.
Yeah.
So that if we ever
except for that-
change the street ordinance again, we don't have to go back and try
Yeah.
to find it somewhere else.
Yep. I like that. That sounds good to me. I'll make that update. Number 6 is just the table of land uses and the list of land uses. The only real change was I took out outdoor storage for the districts you guys didn't want outdoor storage, and I think I added in the commercial, I just added it as a conditional use, I believe. Yep. Under outdoor sales and service. Because you guys had suggested that. So that's the only change, substantial change to this one, I believe. Oh, and I just removed outdoor storage from that and made it its own. Oh, it's funny, the industrial district is the only place in the ordinance where outdoor storage is ever mentioned currently. So I just, removed it from there and created its own bullet. I think that's it though for this. It's the table. Took off outdoor storage, came off of that one.
And
And
solar energy's on all those as well.
7 is the term definition for outdoor storage, no changes there. And then 8 is the half acre to 20,000 square feet. And there was no changes there. So that's it. Jim and I did get a chance to talk with the attorney on the guidelines. So the design downtown, or the design guidelines, are a document that was never actually accepted or voted on by the town, either town meeting or the select board. So it is kind of a wish list document that we have. So the good news is it doesn't need to go back before the town to be changed, essentially. So I think you guys can just add the visual impact information as a guideline. And Phil agreed. So
The one question I have though is in our, I can't remember, it's the commercial district or in our site plan ordinance, should we remove the requirement to comply with the design guidelines then?
yeah, and that was the area where Phil kind of gave us a, well, yeah, kind of answer. Because he did say that since it is referenced in the land use ordinance, it is somewhat enforceable in certain areas. So it's a little gray, I guess. So he did like the idea of possibly extracting stuff from the guidelines, importing it into the land use ordinance as actual performance standards, and then maybe moving away from the guidelines document, since it's not really an enforceable, it's a wish list, basically. So that's an idea. Obviously, that's not something that's happening for this year, but that could be a project for next year.
Yeah, I think, Bob, the thing that we see in the commercial district that usually these guidelines run up against is usually landscaping, parking, and architecture are the biggies. So, and we already have parking standards. Landscaping, we probably could extract some things out. And the architecture is always subjective to the individual, what they want to look at. But I mean, right now where, the guidelines has always funneled them to this New England traditional architecture, which I don't know if any of us knows what that really means, but that's where we're all supposed to be pushed to.
Yep. So the other thing too, I wanted to update you guys on marijuana. The select board did discuss that on Tuesday. It does sound like they're going to put a referendum question out this June, which is going to essentially ask voters, are you supportive of the town exploring a marijuana or adopting an ordinance for marijuana uses? So it's going to be very vague. And if that is approved, then the select board will assemble a committee to review a marijuana use ordinance. And then that will have a phase in that committee process where the planning board has to obviously review ordinance, insertions for our land use ordinance. But the committee itself, and there may be a planning board member on the committee, depending on how the select board sets it up, but the committee itself will actually be responsible for creating a separate standalone ordinance for marijuana, which you guys will then have to incorporate. So if it gets voted down, or if people vote that they're not interested in seeing marijuana uses in Raymond, then we continue to stay, you know, an opt-out town, and we continue to move forward without it. So we'll know in June where we're headed, and then the select board will take action on that then.
So Alex, with that, they differentiate between recreational and medicinal?
No, it's going to stay wide open right now, and that's been one of the topics. So do we make multiple questions, one for medical, one for adult use? And it's just, you know, the town clerk and I had discussed it. It's like, you know, we got to make it as easy to understand as possible because there's so many different terms and uses. And so the thought with the attorney was, let's just make it vague and say, are you interested in the town allowing marijuana establishments? Because that's the term the state uses for all of them. They're all marijuana establishments, basically. And then from there, the committee and the planning board will get to decide, you know, do we want testing? Do we want manufacturing? Do we want grows? Do we want storefronts? You know, all the different individual uses, if the town is in favor of seeing marijuana establishments in town. Of course, we do have a couple marijuana uses, but those were in before the law changed. So they're existing non-conforming uses. And people get confused because they see, you know, the medical store on 302 and they think that, you know, Raymond allows medical storefronts, but it's actually not an allowed use right now because of the law change. So if we want more of them, then we need to be an opt-in town. And if we don't want any more of them, then we have to stay, you know, opt out and not have an ordinance. So on the proposed amendments, I've sent them all to the attorney. If I hear back, he's going to make some changes because that's what he'll do. Once I get those, because we were planning on doing the public hearing at the next meeting, should I email all of those out to you as I get them before the meeting so you can look at them before they go to public hearing, or do you want me to just take what the attorney's suggesting and update the document for public hearing?
I'd like to review them. I know that ahead of time.
Okay. Do you guys want to make a motion to hold a public hearing at the next meeting for the proposed land use changes?
Well, I don't think we need to make a motion, but I'm not sure the timeline for announcing the public hearing. You know, as long as we can meet that timeline, then
yeah, I think it's like 10 to 13 days or something like that. It has to be posted and it's got to go out twice. I'll check with Sandy on that. Sandy is pretty much out this week, but she's planning on working remotely starting next week from home. So she'll still be able to do that stuff. We should be able to make the deadline.
Well, when are the selectmen planning on holding their public hearings? Do you know?
They usually hold theirs right before town meeting, as they set the warrant, which is usually the month before the meeting, so May.
Yeah, I think it's usually been
The
May.
May meeting.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So we don't need to rush it till March if you don't want to. We can
No.
do it in April
I think you can do it in April.
and then pass it, pass the selectmen and let them then take it for May. I don't know if we need the extra time or not, but
No, I think our goal originally was to leave a buffer month in there so that
Right.
we didn't run up to a brick wall and, you know, not be ready. So I think if we want to do April, that's fine. I will check with the town clerk tomorrow to make sure that that's okay with her time schedule for putting together the warrant. And if I hear otherwise, I'll give you a call, Bob, and we can figure out a solution if you want.
okay. So which way we go, March or go April?
I say go April for now.
And do we have any projects coming up in April?
I think we'll have one coming in for that subdivision of Raymond Cape, possibly in April.
For sketch plan?
I think you went through sketch plan. I think it could be coming back for preliminary, right?
Oh, the one on the Cape?
Yeah.
Yeah, Chase.
Okay.
I also have a back lot, but and Jim, you and I can do backlots, right? We haven't actually done one since I've
No,
been
you
here.
and I
but-
haven't. I've done it with everybody else, but not you.
Yeah, well, we might have one coming up soon.
Yeah, we do backlot. Well, the other reason we talked about the extra month was in the event that if anybody from the public had anything that, you know, would require us to go back, that gave us that month of fluff. So if we push it to April, you know, we haven't had much public input on it at this point, so I don't expect that. But if we do, we just may have to expedite and do another quick turnaround with it if something does come up in April.
The solar, I think, is the only thing that could actually drew any attention, and it doesn't seem to be, so I think that's pretty safe. So for the board, the public hearing for the ordinance changes in April then?
Sounds good.
Okay,
So then the only thing we have on for the March would be the return of this Raymond Hills,
yeah,
which will be good because it, you know, we can see it's going to be lengthy again. There's a
It
lot
could
of
be.
information there.
okay. What else we have, anything? Jim, you got anything else?
I've got nothing.
Anyone have any comments?
Nothing.
Can
I
you
did
stop
try
the
to
ice?
help.
Well, my only comment is, can you stop the ice in the rain now?
Yeah, man. I did try to get a hold of Kyle. I have not been successful yet, so I don't have anything to tell you on that one. But hopefully we'll get that ironed out this month. If anybody sees them,
Maybe June.
yeah, if anyone sees them, get an answer.
Move to June.
When do terms, I should know this, but when do terms end with the board?
When
June,
does
I
it
believe.
end? I don't,
June.
oh, his term ends in June?
Well,
And we
the
vote on
typical,
officers in June.
yeah, so typically it's July to June. He may have a couple more years. I think you guys are 3 years, right?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know when he was appointed. I don't think it was this past year, so he may only have a year or he may be done this year.
Yeah, he's been on the board for a while. He's been on there for at least two years, I think, so.
Yeah, at least.
He was here when I came, and I've been here about 5 years.
He's done in 2024. He has one more year.
Okay, so, well, hopefully we'll find them before the year goes out.
Yeah.
Wayne, you must run into him, isn't he a volunteer fireman?
Yeah, we haven't seen much of him either. He's
Oh.
been pretty tied up with his business.
Yeah,
We do have someone interested in joining the planning board that's very qualified. He's an architect, has a lot of experience with shoreland projects. So he'd be a good fit for the planning board.
all right, so maybe I'll just have to go right to the selectmen and get him just removed. For. All
Are we
right,
supposed to talk about this?
I'm sorry,
Are we supposed to go into executive session to talk about first?
probably.
We've got to be careful.
Good point.
Thank you, Greg.
Good point.
Okay, anyone else got anything?
Nope.
All right. Is there a motion? No
Second.
motion? Oh, there was a motion. All those in favor of the motion to adjourn?
Aye.
Thanks, guys.